The Pentagon's new national defense strategy is shifting its top focus back to defending the U.S. homeland and the Western Hemisphere. China is still seen as a major challenge, but it's no longer the Pentagon's main concern. Washington says it wants to keep a balance of power in the Indo-Pacific so no single nation can dominate the region or America's allies. The document doesn't mention Taiwan, which China claims as its territory, but it does highlight plans to strengthen defense along islands that include Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. In Europe, the U.S. stays engaged, but wants European countries to take on more responsibility, especially when it comes to Russia and the war in Ukraine. Russia is described as a manageable threat for NATO allies, but not a direct threat to the United States. And on Iran, the strategy makes clear Washington will not allow Tehran to rebuild a nuclear weapons capability or threaten Israel. It calls Israel a key partner and plans to further empower it to defend itself. On the Korean Peninsula, the Pentagon sees South Korea taking the lead in deterring North Korea, with the U.S. playing a more limited role. All right, let's cross now to Jack Barton, who's joining us live from Seoul. Jack, what does this new defense strategy by the Pentagon mean for South Korea?
Well, it'll have a big implication here because the United States still maintains operational control over South Korea's forces in wartime. So South Korea doesn't have sovereignty over its own troops in times of wartime, and that's very vague because, of course, the Korean War is still technically ongoing. The peace we have is through a truce, and that's why this relationship has lasted. The US also has a say over what weapons that South Korea can and can't have. Now, South Korea has been pushing back against that for the last decade. It's got permission to put slightly bigger warheads on its ballistic missiles. Last year, the government got permission to build nuclear submarines and reprocess spent nuclear fuel to power them. But still, there's a lot more that South Korea needs and can't have. So one would imagine under this new defense shift, that relationship would have to change, and South Korea would have to have a lot more sovereignty over its forces and over what sorts of weapons it can have. And it also raises a big question mark about the roughly 28,500 US troops stationed here, many of them at Camp Humphreys, the biggest US Army base outside the mainland United States. And will they be drawn down? Will South Korea still have access to critical things like satellite information, the missile defense shield? One would assume, given they're talking about critical areas, that the nuclear umbrella is still intact. But of course, not much detail in this report, despite the fact it's going to have huge ramifications here.
And of course, Jack, one of the key questions for the Korean Peninsula will be, how is all this going to be received by Pyongyang, right?
Well, Pyongyang no doubt will be overjoyed at this news. It has long bristled not just at the US troops here, but on the regular visits by US carrier strike groups, B-52 bombers that fly up and down the coast capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And Pyongyang has long described the joint US-South Korea military drills as a rehearsal for war, but it's also likely to be partially welcomed here in Seoul. The government has been pushing to get back operational control of its troops. President Lee Jae-myung says he wants that to happen in his own time in office. And he says he wants South Korea to take the lead in these operations. So a lot of what the US is saying, South Korean government's actually been pushing for. But again, how much time will they have to build up these critical assets they don't have, which the US provides? The one group that's going to be very alarmed by this is the conservative opposition, who have said all along that South Korea's survival depends on what they call an ironclad security relationship with the United States.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Jack Barton joining us live from Seoul. Jack, thanks so much for unpacking all that for us.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.